Hey dreamers, welcome back to your Dream Coach podcast. I'm Shayla Wey, and this is episode 153. If you didn't get an opportunity to listen to last episode, I want to strongly encourage you to go back and start there because today's episode is a direct continuation of that conversation. So in the last episode, I told you about climbing Machu Picchu with my dad. I shared the 4 leadership lessons I brought home from that mountain. And at the end, I mentioned something in passing that, based on the messages I've already received, clearly hit a nerve. And I said that my business kept running while I was gone. And people want to know. They want to know what I built, what I put in place, what it actually looks like for a business to operate without its owner present. Because most of the entrepreneurs I know, if they're being honest, couldn't leave for 12 days. Some of them can't leave for 12 hours with their phone without their phone blowing up. And that's not a time management problem. It's a leadership challenge, and it's a solvable one. And so today, I'm going to go deep on the real test, the one that cuts through all the noise and gets to the truth of what you've actually built. And by the end of this episode, you're going to have a very clear picture of where you are, what's keeping you stuck, and what to do about it. So let's get into it. Well, I want to start this episode with a question, and I want you to answer it honestly, even if the answer makes you uncomfortable. And my question for you is, when was the last time you took a real vacation? Not a working vacation where you check email from the pool, not a long weekend where you step away, but you keep your phone face up on the table during every meal. I mean, a real vacation where you were fully present somewhere else, where your team handled what came up, where the business ran, not because you were remotely managing it, but because it actually worked without you. And for a lot of you, the honest answer is, I can't remember. Or maybe I've never done that. Or maybe I tried once and it was a disaster that I swear I'd never do again. And I want you to hear this not as a judgment, but as a signal. Because the ability to step away is not a luxury reserved for big companies with full executive teams. It's a measurement. It's a diagnostic. It tells you, it's with complete honesty, exactly what kind of business you've built. I call it the vacation test. And it is the most honest business audit you will ever take. And here's the brutal truth underneath it. Most entrepreneurs don't actually own businesses. They own jobs. Very demanding, very expensive, very exhausting jobs where they happen to be the boss, but a job nonetheless. So the difference between a business and a job, when you strip it all away, is this. A job requires your presence to produce. A business produces whether you're present or not. And that's it. That's the whole thing. And when you look at it through that lens, you start to see it everywhere. The restaurant owner who can never take a weekend because the kitchen falls apart without them. The consultant who can't grow because every client relationship is personal to them and it can't be transferred. The founder who has doubled revenue 3 years in a row and is somehow still more exhausted and more trapped than when they started. And these people aren't failing. In many ways, they're succeeding. But they've built something that looks like a business from the outside and functions like a job on the inside. And until they see that distinction clearly, no amount of strategy, marketing, or sales training is going to create the freedom that they're working towards. And I spent over 20 years in corporate leadership before I started coaching. I recruited over 5,000 salespeople. I developed more than 100 managers. I was part of scaling teams to millions of dollars in revenue. And one of the patterns I watched repeat itself over and over at every level was this, is the leaders who couldn't be replaced were also the leaders who couldn't grow. Not because they weren't talented. Often they were the most talented people in the room. But talent that hasn't been transformed into systems, people, and culture creates dependency. And dependency is the enemy of scale. And so the most powerful leaders I've watched, the ones who actually moved organizations forward, were the ones who made themselves unnecessary in one role so they can move into the next one. They were constantly building themselves out of the operational center, not because they weren't valuable, because they understood that their highest value lived somewhere higher than the daily execution. And that lesson applies directly to you as a business owner. And the vacation test is where the rubber meets the road. So let me tell you what actually happened in the weeks before I left for Peru, because I think the honest version of the story is more useful than the polished one. Is, to be honest, I was a little afraid. Not of the climb, I was ready for that. I was afraid of the leaving, afraid of 12 days without my hand on the wheel. There was a voice in my head, and I suspect you know this voice, that kept running scenarios. What if a client has a crisis? What if the team makes a wrong call on something? What if I come back to a mess that takes 3 times as long to clean up as the trip was worth? And underneath all of those specific fears was a deeper one that I had to look at honestly. What if the business works only because I'm in it? What if I've been telling myself I've built something sustainable, but the truth is I'm the engine, and without me running it, nothing moves? That is a terrifying thing to consider, especially when your identity is wrapped up in what you've built, especially when you've worked this hard for this long. The idea that all of it might be more fragile than you've admitted to yourself. That is not a comfortable place to sit. But sitting with it is exactly what I did, because I knew that if I couldn't answer that fear honestly, I'd either not go to Peru, or I'd go and be so present on my phone that I'd miss the whole thing. And I wasn't willing to do either. So I did an audit, a real one. I looked at my business through the lens of that one question: if I'm not here, what breaks? And some things that came up surprised me. There were areas I thought were systemized that still had me at the decision point. There were client relationships that had never been properly handed off to a process, and they worked because of my personal involvement. And I'd been telling myself that there was a feature when really it was a risk. And there were team members who were capable of more than I'd let them do, because somewhere along the way, I'd gotten into the habit of just handling them myself, really because it was faster. And if does that sound familiar at all? And I know that I spent about 3 weeks before the trip doing deliberate preparation, not packing, not itinerary planning, leadership infrastructure work. And I want to share exactly what that looked like, because this is the practical core of everything, and I'm going to teach you today. And so what I built, the 3 pillars of business independence, is pillar number 1 is decision architecture. So the first thing I did was map every type of decision that regularly came to me and categorize them. And I created what I call a decision matrix with 3 different columns. So column 1 is decisions only I should make. These are high stakes, vision level, value level decisions that genuinely require my judgment. Things like a significant strategic pivot, a major client relationship decision, a key hire. There were fewer of these than I thought. Column 2 was decisions my team can make with defined parameters. So this is where most things live. These are the daily operational decisions, client communication decisions, scheduling, logistics, content decisions. And so my job here wasn't to make these decisions. It was to make sure my team understood the parameters well enough to make them confidently without me. And then column 3 is decisions that shouldn't require a decision at all, because they should be handled by a system, a process, or a standing protocol. And if something is being decided every time it comes up, it probably shouldn't be. It should have a documented answer. And so mapping your decisions this way is one of the most clarifying exercises that you can do as a business owner, because most of us are spending significant time and energy on column 2 and column 3 decisions, things that should be handled by our teams or by our systems, because we've never explicitly given those things away. Now, pillar 2 is a team that doesn't need to be managed, it needs to be led. And so this is a massive difference between a team that is managed and a team that is, there is a massive difference, I should say, between a team that's managed and a team that's led. And most business owners, even good ones, are managing when they should be leading. And management is transactional, assigning tasks, check completion, correct deviation, repeat. It requires your ongoing presence because the team is waiting for the next instruction. Leadership, however, is transformational. You shape how people think, what they value, how they make decisions. And a well-led team doesn't need you in the room because they carry your vision and values with them. They ask themselves, well, what would XYZ manager do here? Not because they can't think for themselves, but because the culture is that clearly defined. And building that kind of team takes time. It requires explicit conversations about values, expectations, and standards. And it requires giving people the authority to match their responsibility. And it requires letting them make decisions. So including decisions that you would have made differently, and trusting that a good decision made without you is better than a perfect decision delayed until you are available. And so in the months before Peru, I was intentional about two things: having explicit conversations with my team with the values and the standards I expected them to uphold, and then actually testing that trust before I left. So I started stepping back from decisions I'd been holding on to. I started watching how they handled things, and I saw that they were more capable than I'd been allowing them to demonstrate. And that is a leadership problem, by the way, not a team problem. So when your team isn't performing to the level you need, the first question is always, have I created the conditions for them to do that? And have I given them clarity, authority, and trust? Or have I been holding the wheel so tightly that they never had the chance to drive? And then the third pillar is that systems that carry the culture when you're not there. And so this third pillar is the one most people think of first when they talk about scaling, but it's actually the last one that matters, because systems without the right team and the right decision, architecture are just expensive documentation that nobody uses. And so when the first two pillars are in place, systems become extraordinarily powerful, because now they're not just checklists and SOPs, they're a physical manifestation of your values and systems. And they're the way that your culture shows up even when you're not in the room. So the systems I focused on before the trip were not complicated. And I'm not talking about expensive software, elaborate, project management infrastructure. I'm talking about three things. One, a clear communication protocol. So how decisions get made, who communicates what to what clients, what escalates and what doesn't, and how the team documents and shares important information while I was away. Two is a client experience system, so that every client interaction, whether I'm present or not, reflects the same standard of care, the same response time, and the same voice. And three is a weekly rhythm, a standing structure for how the team operates together, checks in, reviews priorities, makes decisions, that runs the same whether I'm in the country or not. None of that is rocket science. But most business owners haven't built it because they've been too busy doing the work to build the infrastructure that makes the work sustainable. So here's the thing I want you to understand, is that the time you invest in building those three pillars is not time away from growing your business. It's the most direct growth investment that you can make, because every hour you spend still being the bottleneck is an hour your business can't grow past you. So I built the infrastructure and I had the honest conversation with my team that I prepared. And then I got on the plane. And I want to tell you about what happened, not just in the business, but in me over those 12 days, because the lessons I'm about to share are ones you cannot get from a book or a podcast or a coaching call. You can only get them by actually doing it. So lesson one, the first 48 hours are the hardest, the most revealing, because the first couple of days in Peru, I kind of kept reaching for my phone, not because I needed to, but just out of pure habit, the habit of being available, the habit of being needed, the habit of monitoring, checking, making sure. And every time I caught myself doing it, I had to make a conscious choice to put it down, to trust the people and the systems I'd built, to believe that I had actually done the preparation work and it was going to hold. And then by day 3, something interesting happened, is that urge to check started to fade. Not because I stopped caring, but because I realized at a level that I felt that the things were okay. The team was handling it. The clients were being served. The world was not falling apart. And in that space created that by that letting go, something else started to emerge, clarity. The kind of big picture clarity that is almost impossible to access when you're in the daily thick of running a business. And I started to see things that I hadn't been able to see before. What was working? What wasn't? What were the real opportunities? What I actually wanted the next year to look like. And you just can't get that clarity from inside the machine. You have to step outside of it. And most business owners never do that, which means they never get access to the strategic thinking that their business really needs most from them. And so the business doesn't just need you to be present. It needs you to be clear. And you cannot be clear when you're always available. And then the second lesson is that your team will always will really show you who they really are. And this is the lesson that moves me the most, honestly, is that when you step away and your team gets to show you what they're made of. And if you've built the right culture, what they show you will exceed your expectations. And so, there are lots of situations that came up in those 12 days, but my team handled it. And I didn't find out about it in the moment, not in real time, but afterwards. And I was super proud of how the way they navigated certain situations over the 12 days that I stepped away. And had I been the bottleneck, not because they needed me, but because I hadn't fully let go of the need to be needed, then that would have been a leadership issue, right? Or that kind of, I guess, even deeper is an identity issue. And so it's just worth sitting with and being honest with yourself and to recognize, where some of those bottlenecks are and where they can be. And so I want to give you, and I want to get really kind of tactical here, is that I want to give you, and I want you to walk away from this episode feeling inspired, but directionless. I don't want you to feel that way. Sorry. I want you to give you some direction. And so I want you to have a clear next step. So I'm going to give you what I call the vacation readiness audit. And this is the 4-part framework that I use with my coaching clients to evaluate where they are and what they need to build. And you can do this for yourself right now, even with a piece of paper and just some honesty. So there's 4 parts to this. Number 1 is the decision audit. So for 3 days this week, write down every decision that comes to you, big or small. At the end of 3 days, sort them into 3 buckets. The ones that are only you, your team, or a system. And the goal is to get at least 80% of your decisions into the second and third buckets. If most of your decisions are in the first bucket, then that's your work. That's part 1. Part 2 is the dependency map. So I want you to ask yourself, what in my business only works because I personally do it? Client relationships that are tied to your energy, not your process. Content that requires your direct involvement every time. Operational tasks that you've never handed off because it was easier to just do them. And then make the list and then ask, what would I need to build to transfer each of these to a system or a person? Okay. And then the third thing is the team trust inventory. So look at each person on your team and ask honestly, do I trust this person to make a decision in this area without checking with me first? If the answer is no, there are 2 possibilities. Either they're not the right person for the role, or you haven't given them the clarity, authority, and practice they need to earn that trust. So which one is it? You just need to be honest, right? Because the answer will determine your next step. And then part 4 is the 2-week simulation. And this is the big one, is I want you to run a mental simulation. If you left tomorrow for 2 weeks with no contact, no calls, no messages, no check-ins, and walk through every area of your business, client delivery, sales, operations, finance, team communication, where does it hold and where does it wobble and where does it fall apart? And don't edit the answer. Don't rationalize it. Just let yourself see what's true, because that picture, the honest version of it, is your leadership development roadmap for the next 90 days. And if you want support building that, if you want a guide for the climb, that's exactly what the LFG Business Academy is designed for. So we go deep into leadership identity, team building, systems, and scaling in a way that actually fits the life you want to live, not the hustle you're trying to get out of. And the link you can get that is in the show notes. And so I want to close with something that I said in the last episode, because I think it bears repeating in this context, is the business can't outgrow you. And that's always been true. But there's the flip side of that statement that doesn't get said enough. The business can't outgrow you if you're standing in the middle of it, doing everything, holding every thread, and being present for every decision. So you cannot be both the builder and the building. And at some point, the work of the leader is to build something that stands on its own, not because you disappear from it, but because you move to a higher floor, because your presence shifts from doing to leading, from executing to visionary, and from being the engine to being the architect. And that shift doesn't happen at once. It really happens in small acts of trust over time, and in the decision you hand to your team and don't hold back, and in the system that you build so you don't have to think about that anymore, in the culture that you create so that your values show up in the room even when you're not in it. And it happens on the climb, step by step. So I want you to take your Machu Picchu trip, whatever that means for you. I want you to build a business that can hold while you're gone, not because stepping away is the goal, but because the ability to step away is proof that you've built something real. So do the audit this week, map your decisions, look at your dependencies, have the honest conversation with yourself about where you're still the bottleneck, and then start building the thing that sets you free. If this episode was helpful, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. I know the business owner in your life who is chained to their phone and hasn't taken a real vacation in years. Send this to them. It might be the most useful thing you do for them this week. And next week, we're going to go into the identity work, and We're going to talk about an episode I've been building toward since the season started. And we're going to talk about the exact shift from thinking like a founder to thinking like a CEO and what it looks like in practice and how you know when you've made it. And that one's going to be a game changer. So thanks for tuning in today to your Dream Code podcast. And I will see you next time. Until then, keep climbing.